Welcome back to the show this morning. I'm Real Lance Roberts. Danny Ratliff joining me this morning. So talking a little bit about these, kind of household benefits that we've been getting. So a big chunk of the recovery that we saw from the March lows was because of $1,200 checks to households, $600 a week in additional benefits coming in. And so that led to a whole variety of things, right? We saw a surge in economic activity, retail sales, so forth and so on. All those expired at the end of July. Well, here we are now very rapidly approaching the end of August, a month later. And we haven't heard really anything more about additional stimulus from the government. The only thing that's in place at the moment, to any, I guess you call it relative degree, is Donald Trump's executive order, where he said in this executive order, the government will provide, $300 a week in additional unemployment benefits, as long as, and here's the caveat, you're already getting $100 from your state, right? So you've already got to be unemployed, collecting at least $100 a week from the state. And then if the state has signed up for the program, then you can get an additional $300 a week, so a total of $400 in additional unemployment benefits. Now, a couple of things about that. First of all, only 25 states right now have signed up. Now, Texas is one of those states. So we are in the pool. South Dakota has said, nah, we're out completely. We'll see what happens. But regardless of that, yes, you're going to get $400 a week if you sign up, but that's still less. And this is the important thing. It's less than what you were getting before. So it's less than the $600, which means that you have less money to spend. So again, it's great that you're getting the $400 a week, but that's less money than what we had previously. So this economic recovery that we saw from March is now going to be fueled by less money over the course of the next few weeks, few months. And more importantly, there's no $1,200 additional check coming to households. Okay. So that's a lot less money coming in at this point. So as this cash flow surge that we saw, this personal income surge that we saw from the March lows begins to disappear, we're going to start seeing some impacts to economic data. And we saw a little bit of that yesterday in the Michigan consumer confidence numbers, because they plunged back to a cycle low, even though markets are all-time highs. And normally those two things are very correlated, but consumer confidence is weakening, and we're probably going to see a lot more of the economic data weaken as well. But Danny, we're talking about this a little bit on the break. I mean, these all have impacts to kind of, planning and financial structures, et cetera.
Well, they do. And so, like you mentioned, we haven't seen the real hurt from people being unemployed, because we've had the stimulus, we had that $600 additional unemployment, plus not to mention the state unemployment. State unemployment is set to run out for many people who lost jobs in March and April, here in the coming weeks, if not months. But this extra $300 or $400 in all is actually going to go away December 6th. They put $44 billion aside for it. They're going to have to do something all over again. Right now, there's not any talk. Last week, 2 weeks ago, this was a big deal where markets were kind of hinging on this. It seemed like every time we get a little bit further down the road, things would react positively. This is going to be a larger impact. Like you mentioned, consumer confidence is waning a bit. I think that'll likely increase should we not see much more done. Because you may get this $400, but what's the caveat? You have to get this to get $300. You have to get $100 from. So I guess it's not really $400 because you're already getting that $100 from your state. So what happens when you're off of state unemployment?
Right.
When those 26 weeks expire, which that's going to happen for many. So I don't know that we're going to see nearly as many people on this as we would think, nor is it going to have the economic impact overall. So now you have to start thinking about, it's like we've talked about in April. So April, you get the $1,200 stimulus, plus many people are on unemployment from a state and federal benefits. And personal income actually rose. We saw people spending money. We didn't see the typical impact that a shutdown or a recession would generally have. And so, in fact, the Fed's Esther George just came out and said she thinks that we're likely going to go into a double dip recession. And that could be the case because this could be the catalyst for that if there's not additional stimulus passed. So I don't know. This is an interesting dynamic here. And what's even more interesting is only 25 states have actually signed up. what's it going to take for the rest of the guys to get on board? Because look, all of this is going to help. Yes, it's not the $600, but we found out that the numbers were like 5 of 6 people were actually had a pay raise. I mean, come on, that's not what these government benefits are for. So you're actually incentivized to stay home and not work for as long as possible. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there looking for jobs, knocking on doors, and it's a tough time. So, I think that people should get all you can. You paid into it. You've put taxes all these years. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of this, we want to get people back in the workforce. We want people that longevity because, I fear that when this runs out, we may run into a brick wall here. And that's what's kind of scary.
Yeah. And look, it is. And again, as these, there are, time frames on these, as you said, in order to get the additional 300, you've got to be on state. But if you run out of your state unemployment benefits, you can't get the 300, right? So it's a trick. So, and which means that a lot of people that may be depending on the additional money won't be able to qualify for it. And already there's about 1 million people who have already fallen off of that 26 roll period. So that's, and every week now, because we're getting further and further into the year, every week, more and more people will fall off unemployment claims because they've hit their 26-week limit.
And you got to remember, some of those weeks we saw 6 million people, 9 million people. I mean,
they're coming lumps.
Yeah, it was an enormous amount. Now, a lot of those were furloughed. Some of those came back to work. But with the economy still kind of halfway open, we're seeing that a lot of people are just kind of, they're waiting. Well,
actually, we're seeing, and to that point, we're seeing a lot of those, what were expected to be temporary layoffs now becoming permanent layoffs. Yeah. We're starting to see the small business recovery is now starting to falter. And we're starting to see another cycle of closures of small businesses, which means more people lose their jobs. So, the point is that, we're still clipping off 1 million people a week on jobless claims. Now, here's the other important thing about this. Jobless claims will fall because companies run out of people to lay off and fire, right? So if I'm in business, I've got to maintain some level of staff. I may be able to cut it back markedly, but I've still got to keep some people on payroll in order to run my business. So there's a point to where layoffs will naturally begin to fall just simply because I've run out of people to lay off and fire, right? And the only way I can file for claims is that I've been fired or terminated, right? So if I quit, I can't file for claims. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that the economy's because jobless claims are falling, doesn't mean the economy's actually getting better or that we're actually hiring a lot of people to come back to work. It just means we're running out of people to lay off. The other thing that will occur is that as people run out of benefits, they will disappear from the continuing claims. So continuing claims are what, after your first initial claim, you then go on to continuing claims, and we count how many people are on continued unemployment claims. That number will also fall, and will fall markedly over the course of the next couple of months as we hit those 26-week marks. And so, for instance, in 1 month, if nobody gets a job, everybody's just that 6 million that were laid off and fired that made claims 26 weeks prior, they'll all fall off continuing claims all in 1 week. So you'll see potentially a big decline in claims. Doesn't mean those people went back to work. Doesn't mean those people have a job. Doesn't mean anything positive. It just means they're no longer counted. And that's the really important thing to look at when you get into the employment numbers. When people report the BLS numbers and they say, well, unemployment rate was, 5.1% this week or whatever it is, how many people are we no longer even counting as part of the labor force? Because that's a function of how many people are working versus how many people we count as part of the labor force. So if we shrink that labor force by half, your unemployment numbers are going to look really good. You're just going to have a lot of people living in the streets and pooping on the streets in San Francisco. That's what happens, right? It's not really a relevant picture of what's happening in the economy because of the fact that it's a function of these statistical measures that don't really represent the case of the whole.
I think that's a good thing to keep in mind because we so often just get tied up with those numbers and don't realize that, okay, well, why did this change the way it did? Mm-hmm. And now sometimes that's not always good with it changing the way that, people fall off the grid. That's not a good thing.
Right.
And that just means that we're going to rely on people more and more and more. That goes back to that whole personal responsibility thing. But we probably don't need to get into that. But so I think, we see things that are happening, right? It's like right now here we're in Houston, we see a storm in the Gulf, we prepare. There's a lot of warning signs out there that say, hey, maybe you should start preparing. It's like you've talked about trimming some positions. You talked about this week trimming the garden.
Right.
I think that's really important.
Right. It's just a hurricane's coming. You prepare, right? I mean, we've got a hurricane blowing in, so it's important to run out, get some water in the brisket, be ready for. We talked about this yesterday. It's important to be prepared. Russell, how many brisket did you go get yesterday? Did you get your 2?
I actually already have a couple in the freezer. I'm good to go.
See? We're prepared here in Texas. So
God bless Texas.
Plenty of charcoal, plenty of wood. I'm ready to smoke, baby.
There you go. All right, we'll be right back after the break. Don't go away.
That's the way you do it. Money for nothing and kicks for free. Not any working. That's the way you do it. Look at you, them guys ain't dumb.
Real Investment Show podcasts are now available on iTunes. Listen anyplace, anytime at iTunes.com.